You're in the Dunklin County Library, and you're in the genealogy room. Homer Swain has been at this job, at this work. He is researching old theaters.
Going back, I got interested the first time is when I seen when they closed the Palace Theater. And my question was...
Did you cry?
Well, everybody didn't cry in that, but, everybody felt a little sentimental, about
yes,
that.
I
You grew
did.
up as a kid. I mean, I didn't live in Kennett. I lived outside, but I remember, driving from Gobbler over here and watching...
Oh, you lived in downtown Gobbler?
Gobbler, Missouri,
Okay.
And, it was something to travel up here on Saturday and see a movie or something like that. That was a privilege, man, believe me. And... But anyway, I got interested when I seen it closed, and my question was, when was it built? And nobody knew.
So you started looking through
Started here. Looking. Me and my wife both belonged to the Genealogy Society. I realized that we had access to Duncan Democrat microfilm from the 1800s to the present day. And so I just started looking in there for advertisements of movies. And at first, all of these names of these theaters just blew my mind.
Well,
I'd never heard of them before.
I'm having trouble to Star and Lyric and Electric.
And I said, where is all this stuff? And again, what really helped me was my oldest son informed me that these Sanborn fire maps that they had made in 1911, they made another in 1919 of Kennett.
Why would they do this in 1911?
Because they would make the maps, and they would go into a town and make these maps, and they would state what each building was made out of. Wood, brick, what kind of water supplies they had to it, if they had any kind of, water protection or that. And then they would sell it to the insurance company. If you was operating an insurance company here in Kennett, you would buy these maps so you would have them on hand, so if somebody in Kennett would come in and want some insurance for their building, you would go to it, and that's how you sold them the insurance, based on how the building was built. And that's how these maps were.
So you kept up with where the theaters were?
Well, yeah, in 1911, it started showing all of these theaters, and that kind of put everything in a row, so you know where you were talking about when you talk about the Alamo and the Star, the first one, that was on Main Street, block or half a block off in the square, and everything. And then I started going back to those dates, and I started looking at early 1900 and started finding newspaper.
And you found a lot of interesting other things to come on that you know about it. Now, what you were talking, something about this sheet.
Well, one thing, and I missed, and I didn't bring out in the Opera House. Again, the Opera House was built in 1896 after the big fire. It was built just like it is today. The bottom floor was New York Clothing. The top floor was the Opera House. At pretty well in 1922, the pretty well end of the Opera House was over for getting people in here and performing operas or anything.
Because they already have theaters.
They have the theaters. Everything.
Yeah.
But this was interesting. In December 22nd, 1922, it states the old Opera House is now a good basketball floor for the Kennett basketball team.
Basketball floor? I knew
they worked and redid it up there. Shelton and them let them go up there and I guess set up the goals and all of that. And
you mean upstairs?
Upstairs.
Well, what's downstairs?
The clothing store was still down there.
Oh, okay. So the boys would practice. And who is the coach? Do we know?
It doesn't say. It just gives the schedule. January the 12th looked like open day. They played
Kennett's going to play Cardwell.
And January the 5th. Now here's probably January the 19th, Papa Bluff at Kennett. So they would play up there in that Opera House.
That is amazing that there's that kind of room up there. I can't believe
You know.
a basketball game.
That when I seen that, I just thought, my goodness, they did everything in that opera
They
building.
did. Okay,
What
they did.
They utilized that thing just like they do the American Legion building out there, you know, out of town,
yeah,
there.
yeah.
They had about anything again in the palace, church service, you know, school plays.
So that stage was available for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Now, was that and the Opera House, were those the only places probably you could put on stage plays or
Yep, it was, because the palace had a huge stage. It had an orchestra pit, and it had that big stage with the curtains, the whole thing.
Okay, all right.
So they could, you know, put everything in and that. And then in 1974, the palace was sold, and they changed the name later to the Cinnamon. They come in and redid the inside of it and put in all different seating.
They changed the name to the Cinema at this time?
No, it run a year or so before they changed the name. I don't know exactly when they did change.
Tommy's came in then
in 49. Kennett, if you started back...
Can I turn this around where he can...
This is Thanksgiving Day was the last showing in 1910.
They lasted to the Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Okay. Closing the doors November 28th.
Yep.
Oh, that is sad. That is sad.
Yeah. But you go back, plumb back to the Opera House, which was started in 1896, and this closed in 2010. That's 114 years Kennett had either the Opera House, movie houses in Kennett. 114 years of entertainment for this town and that.
And Kennett probably was the only, was that the city, was that the big drawing place for everything?
Well,
or
it was county seat.
Malden?
Not as much, because Kennett was the county seat, and everybody had to come here.
Yeah.
You know, they had their business and everything. They had theater, so did Cena, different one. But, and then you get back to
now, what is this? Now, I thought this was an old one.
Yeah, that will get on the south side, but I got one more thing to bring up on the
palace. But when the palace, this is, you're going back in history with this. You're going to go back to 1927. I mean,
the palace actually was in business. You count when it was on Main Street, the first Alamo, until the present day Cinnamon, and it was 101 year old. And that kind of, you know, gets everything up on the palace and that. Now then, we're going to go backwards. We're going to go back because we're going to talk about the movie house on the south side of the square.
Okay, all right.
And the movie house on the south side of the square had...
Now, how many are there in Kennett at this point?
There was 3 of them.
3 movies.
There was at 1927, there was the second Alamo, the second Star, and Tatum said he could do a better job at showing movies, so he built him a theater on south side, on the south square over there. He remodeled one of his buildings, and he called it the Lyric Theater.
So we've got 3 operating theaters at this period in history, in 1927.
Yep.
Okay.
You had one on the south side and everything. He leased it out, and he let took a couple guys, Rayburn and Garrett, run it for him. And the Lyric run for a few years here at that, and then like 1930, they changed the name, or the Lyric went out of business. This is the one thing on the movie house on the south side. I haven't been able to say when the Lyric went out of business and when they reopened it under a different name. It's just not there. I don't know. They just wasn't in the paper. But that movie house was reopened, and it was called the Liberty Theater.
So the Lyric is reopened as the Liberty.
Liberty Theater.
Okay.
And everything. It run probably a year or year and a half on that, because then it didn't last too long. And then we're going to get back to Tom Ford. Remember, Tom Ford at one time
What's the
owned,
name of his theater?
this was Ford Theater here, but go back on Tom Ford is, Tom Ford, him and Vardell at one time owned the Alamo Theater. Then he went up to Fredericktown, and he come back from Fredericktown, and he opened up the old Liberty Theater, and he called it the Ford Theater. This was in the late 30s, and he called it the Ford Theater. Now, what happened to him was, you got, at this time, you had the Palace running and the Ford Theater running in 1930.
Okay, all right.
Because the Star Theater had already shut down. It was gone.
So we got two theaters in
Two
1930.
theaters. 1930. You had the Palace and you had the Ford Theater.
Okay.
Depression, the town couldn't support two theaters. So Tom Ford had closed his in like 1930, end of 1930.
Okay, so Tom Ford has Talking Pictures. So Talking Pictures was, the talkies were no big deal. If you had a theater, you could go right to talkies and without any problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Tom Ford, the way he got to talking, he'd entered into a contract with some people in St. Louis that brought in some, at that day's time, some pretty good equipment and put in there for the talkie theaters and everything. But it didn't last very long because he went out of business. He couldn't stand it.
Okay, so you're saying the Depression just...
Put him under.
Okay, so did we get down to...
One theater.
Did the Palace survive?
The Palace survived. E.B. Vanderbilt owned the Palace.
Okay.
This was in 1931 when Ford closed. The company had invested out of St. Louis a bunch of equipment in that theater. They talked to E.B. Vanderbilt, and he took over the building and the equipment. Later, he reopened it under the name that most people will recognize, the Ritz Theater.
Oh, okay, yes.
And it run
When we came to Kennett, the
30s,
Ritz was operating,
late
yes.
30s. He remodeled it in 1940, and it stayed the Ritz Theater. He run both of them. E.B. run both theaters from the late 30s until 1958, when the corner drugstore burnt there on the south side, and the smoke damage to the Ritz forced E.B. to close it, and at that time he never did open it up again.
So the Palace and the Ritz owned by the same man.
Well, they were run, yeah, they've been owned.
Run by the same man,
E.B.
and
Vanderbilt.
then he got burned out or in smoke damage in his theater in 58.
58.
We're down to one theater.
One theater, the Palace Theater.
Okay, all right.
And it stayed that way until 1949, that Hardy Boyd built the Tommy Drive-In out on
yeah.
west of town out here.
We'd load all the kids in and put the quilts in for the little ones to go to bed and pop our own popcorn.
That's right.
Oh, I love Tommy's Drive-In.
I got acquainted with E.B. Vanderbilt III, who is a nephew of E.B., the senior, and he told me that they had talked to Vanderbilt before Boyd built the drive-in for him to build one, and his comments was, it'll never go over.
Drive-ins will never go over.
No, it won't go over. So he didn't. So Hardy Boyd built that in August 1949, and it will hold 140 cars, or 150 cars, I'm sorry. It was 12 acres there.
You've been listening to Homer Swain, and he has researched since 1900, I think, pretty much theaters in Kennett. And Homer, we thank you for letting us come down and for you to go through all this and show
Well,
us.
I appreciate it, Rosemary, and everything, and it's fun to me. Like I say, me and my wife both retired, and it's just fun to do.
Well, all right. History's fun to do, so think about joining the Genealogy Society right here at the library.